Okay, 1984. 1984 was a really weird time in America, especially in Windham, Ohio. It had nothing to do with the book by that title by George Orwell. The presidential race between Ronald Reagan and Walter Mondale had two focal points. Geraldine Ferraro, Mondale's running mate, was the first woman ever nominated for one of America's two highest offices. But her husband was under indictment for real estate fraud. He'd refused to release his income tax returns, and the resulting financial scrutiny was enough to derail the Democratic ticket. Ronald Reagan won 49 out of 50 states that year. The Route 303 bridge over the turnpike near Graceville was closed for 3 months. And Ed Nutter's mobile station, where football player Dan Nutter had worked and was today known as the GF Mini Mart, had lost half its business as people had to detour through Mahoney Corners to go east. Windham got a new priest when Father Wolski, who had spent 6 years in the Vatican City, was assigned to a slightly smaller parish at St. Michael's. And Windham schools got their third superintendent in 3 years. The village of Windham had seen its greatest uproar in decades in December of 1982, when 3 members of the Board of Education, for reasons never revealed in public, voted to fire Bob Wirt, deciding that he was incompetent as a school superintendent after 21 years as a Windham administrator and only 19 months before he was eligible to retire. 3 days later, a group of 300 Windhamites armed with verbal pitchforks gathered at the community building to organize a battalion in support of Wirt. The war lasted all of December, with picketing at the high school and hiring of attorneys both sides. Board members had their houses egged. It all came to a head on December 30th. As the board prepared for its final vote on the superintendent's termination, Wirt shocked the packed gymnasium by resigning on the spot. The board then immediately rehired him for 7 months as the Director of Educational Planning, at the same salary. The new position had no duties whatsoever, but Board President Carolyn Norman said Wirt would be carrying out his non-existent duties from his own home. Only in Windham could this happen. His replacement, Joseph Rogers, lasted only 1 tumultuous year. And in 1984, the Board of Education, hoping someone familiar with the town could calm things down, brought in Linda Huntley, an elementary principal from Brecksville. But around Windham, she was better known as Linda Griswold, Windham High School class of 1959. The Windham Booster Club, organized many years earlier by legendary coach Leo Cott, boasted 227 members. They had raised $5,000 through concession sales and drawings and had bought, among other equipment, a new 7-man sled for the football team. Secretary Patty Moore said their next mission was to raise $5,000 for a new scoreboard, since the old one was threatening to topple over on anyone who was standing in the end zone. And the 1984 Windham Bombers football team was coming off their first winning season since 1974. They had fought to a 6-3-1 record, losing league games only to champion Mogador and runner-up Southeast. And they had a lot of expectations riding on their young shoulders. The junior high teams had rung up 2 consecutive undefeated seasons, so there was going to be a lot of talent on Ed Little Field. They had 15 lettermen returning, headlined by team captain Bobby Starks, all 5'7" and 150 pounds of him, who had rushed for almost 1,000 yards his junior year, and who was also the place kicker. The quarterback was expected to be Joey Fabry, who would be throwing to ends Jeff Graham and Bill Pennington. The line would be anchored by Ron Spencer, Ron Dye, and Guy Friend, and the one sure starter at tackle was Dave Wheeler. Dave Lutz would be out on the wing, catching the few passes that emerged from the Bombers' run-based offense. Dan Nutter and Bill Peachy, who had been told to sleep with the football so he could get used to the field, was available at end. Head coach Jim Berner, an athletic fixture at Windham since the late 1950s, was counting on assistants Don Robinson, Bill Posguy, and Glenn Pesachek to have the boys ready. There were 40 boys on the roster when they took the team picture. There were a whole lot fewer standing on the sidelines for the opening game against Newton Falls. The Tigers always gave the Bombers a struggle. In fact, their two previous games had ended in 6-6 ties. This game was almost a duplicate. Bobby Starks kicked the fourth quarter field goal to give the Windham a 9-8 win. So why was the game so close? And why were there so few players standing on the sideline? 30 years with Windham athletes had given Jim Berner a set vision of what being a Bomber meant. And he was nothing if not a stickler for the rules. He had suspended 6 players, including several starters, for violation of team standards, and athletic director Francis Davis had supported him completely. Bill Pennington suddenly became the quarterback at game time. Even though he had taken snaps at practice, Pennington would have to grow into that role. Unfortunately, any relief Bombers fans felt after a win under those trying circumstances was banished with the opening of the Portage County League schedule the next week. Streetsboro keyed on stopping Bobby Starks, almost an impossibility, as he rushed for 178 yards. But the Rockets allowed him only one visit to the end zone. In fact, the Bombers only ran 13 plays the entire first half, and a fumble by Bobby on the Windham 13 allowed Streetsboro to turn a 7-6 deficit into a 12-7 win. The next game, against state-ranked McDonald, saw the air filled with footballs, but not the good kind. Both teams combined for 14 punts in a scoreless tie. The Bombers had picked off 4 interceptions, but couldn't convert a single one to a touchdown. After 3 games, the Windham defense was one of the stingiest in the area, giving up an average of less than 7 points a game. It was a good thing, too, since the offense was averaging less than 5. The next game against the Southeast Pirates was one of the classic games of all time. The Pirates didn't score a single point. Neither did the Bombers' offense. The final score was 2-0. Bobby Starks had gained 47 yards, but the Bombers gave back half that total in penalties. Southeast threw 3 interceptions and lost 1 fumble, but Windham, despite living much of the game in the Pirate red zone, just couldn't punch the ball in. A ball that sailed over the Southeast punter's head for a safety put the only points on the board. By that point in the season, the Bombers were playing like a team in desperation. They couldn't score, despite Starks' incredible performances, but they also refused to give up any ground. In the next game, against Ritztown, they had to dig in their heels even deeper. The defense forced 4 Rover turnovers, and Bobby Starks accounted for every single point: a touchdown, an extra point, and a field goal with 2 minutes left to seal a 10-7 victory. But he'd done even more. The play before the field goal was a halfback pass of 41 yards thrown by, who else? Bobby Starks. And he stopped the ensuing Ritztown drive with an interception. Rovers must have thought that there were a half a dozen cloned Bobby Starks on the field that night. For the 4th game in a row, Coach Berner used the phrase, "We hung in there," in his post-game comments. Hanging in there was becoming the mantra of the season. Would hanging in there be enough with last year's PCL championships and perennial state playoff contender Mogadore coming to town? Mogadore and Windham had hated each other since 1957, and Berner tried to put the fear of Starks into the Wildcats. In the preview of the battle between the PCL's two top teams, there was a picture of Bobby Starks staring out of the Record Courier. And right below it was perhaps the only joke Jim Berner ever told in his life. After the reporter recounted everything that Starks had done in the Rootstown game, Berner deadpanned, and after the game, Bobby drove the team bus home. Wildcat coach Norm Lingle made no attempt to hide his admiration for the Bomber speedster. "He's the league's most valuable player, for sure," said Lingle. "Our game plan is simple. Stop Starks. He's a great athlete who does so many things right. He's physical. He's ungodly fast." Now, the Bombers had given up only 27 points in 5 games, but the Wildcats had given up only 24. The team that got their offense in gear would be in a position to win the league crown. There was one more thing at stake. The Bombers were leading the region in the computer rankings for the first time in a decade. Berner poo-pooed the rankings. It's not important right now. It doesn't mean a thing until after the season. You just have to take the games one at a time. Last week, Rootstown was our most important game. This week, it's Mogadore. Well, it sure was. When it's Windham versus Mogadore, coached by the legendary Norm Lingle, it always was. And what Berner didn't tell the reporters is that the Bombers were down to 28 healthy bodies, many of whom had never seen action in the 5 nail-biters that they'd played so far. The headline in the next morning's Record Courier read, "Bobby Starks for Windham Mayor. Windham tops Wildcats 20-0. Hell, Bobby probably could have challenged President Ronald Reagan at the Windham voting booths that year. The first time he touched the ball, he zigzagged 71 yards through the entire Mogadore defense, and then rubbed salt in the wound by kicking the extra point. As Berner said, honestly without needing to, that set the tone for the whole game. In the third quarter, Mogadore marched 80 yards in 17 plays to the Bomber 4, and Starks then made 2 vicious goal line tackles to keep the Wildcats from pay dirt. 4 interceptions by Ron Guy, Brian Miller, Dave Lutz ensured that the Bomber defense remained untouched. Another TD by Starks, Bill Pennington's low completion for an 18-yard touchdown to Bill Peachy, and a team that had been written off when Berner suspended those starters to begin the season sat in first place in the PCL for the first time since 1974. Berner told the post-game reporter, "Our boys have a lot of character, and they keep proving it every week. I'm so proud of those kids and my coaching staff," and he should have been. On Thursday, the Record Courier would print in very tiny type the notice that the Bombers had climbed 10th in the state UPI rankings. The question was, with 4 games left, could they keep it up? The next week would tell, as co-leader Crestwood was waiting for them at Jack Lambert Stadium. It promised to be a defensive struggle, since the Red Devils were yielding less than a touchdown a game. It was a very warm day for October, almost 75 degrees at game time, and by the time the game was over, a thick, almost impenetrable fog had settled on the field. That, unfortunately, was a perfect metaphor for how the game had gone for the Bombers. Oh, Bobby Starks had done his part. On the second play of the game, he took a pitch out from Bill Pennington and heaved a 93-yard touchdown pass to Dave Lutz, who didn't have anyone but Crestwood cheerleaders in his vicinity. But that was as close as the Bombers would come to the end zone for the next 47 minutes and 4 seconds. As Berner said after the game, they hit us as hard as we've been hit all year. And because they created their own plays, recovering a fumble on the 48 and marching 10 plays for a score, the Red Devils won 14-7 to take over sole possession of the league lead. So now, After 2 conference losses, there would be no PCL trophy for the Bombers this year. But there was still the state playoffs as a goal, to be one of the 8 teams to qualify statewide. Now, winless Waterloo was coming for Windham's homecoming. Surely a team that was only 2 touchdowns short of an undefeated season could blow the hapless Vikings off the field. Well, it didn't happen quite that way. The vaunted Bomber defense gave up 243 yards. Only bad snaps, an interception by Tim Gear, and touchdowns by Bobby Starks and Ron Cooper, who was so tough that he played fullback and nose tackle on defense, enabled Windham to squeak out a 14-6 win. Even though Starks did rush for 165 yards, it came on 24 carries. The highlight of the game was honestly the crowning of Barb Showalter as homecoming queen at halftime. Sooner or later, Windham had to demonstrate an offense to rival its tough defense. The explosion came the next Friday. Windham scored 35 points, and they needed every one of them to stave off the Woodridge Bulldogs, who pounded the Bomber defense for 21 points themselves. It was a good thing that Bobby Starks was on top of his game that night. By the end of the 4th quarter, he had carried the ball 20 times for 177 yards. And he had personally scored 29 of the Bombers' 35 points. Ron Dye, on a pick-6 interception, was the only other Bomber to even sniff Pater. But the offensive explosion only partially obscured something Woodridge had discovered. The Windham defensive secondary could be exploited. In fact, quarterback Dave Yates had completed 24 passes. So the question was, could Burner tighten up that hole before the traditional season-ending clash with the Garfield G-Men? And there was another problem. Those wars against Waterloo and Woodridge had yielded scant computer points. So the question was, excuse me, the Bombers had fallen to 2nd place in the computer rankings, and only the top 2 in each region qualified. But as Burner had said earlier in the year, you have to take the games one at a time and let the chips fall where they may. There was one more reason why the Bomber faithful would pack the stadium that November night. It would be the last time that Bobby Starks would appear on a home field. The bittersweet ending of an epic football era. Bobby didn't disappoint. He ran for 142 yards to go over the 1,300 mark for the season. He scored 8 points to total 80 for the season to win the PCL scoring championship. And the Bombers shut out the G-Men to clinch a playoff berth that had been a long time coming. Burner praised the team, the community, his assistants, basically everyone but himself after the game. But he saved the most praise for Bobby Starks. He's quite a young man. He's one of our co-captains and he leads by example. He literally carried us at times this year. We're going to miss him, but he'll be a success in anything he tries. The next Monday, when the computer rankings were revealed, the Bombers were in. They were headed south, taking their 7-2-1 record to Massillon Perry High School to play the 9-1 Smithville Smithies, whose mascot, and I swear to God this is true, their mascot was a skinny kid who wore an anvil on his head. The Bombers had only given up 68 points in 10 games, but the Smithies had only given up 61. The most telling statistic was that Windham had scored only 124 points all year, and Smithville had scored 217. Their quarterback had passed for 17 touchdowns. In the pregame article, the Record Courier writer reported that the Smithville quarterback would throw the long pass, to which Burner deadpanned, as only Jim Burner could. I assume he can throw the short pass, too. On the same day, the newspaper reported reported that legendary Bomber coach Leo Cott was going to be inducted into the Portage County Hall of Fame, a nonstop rainstorm drenched the Stark County football fields. The Smithies could manage only 58 yards rushing, but the Bombers were worse. Bobby Stark slipped and slid for 34 yards and 15 carries. A bad snap sailed over punter Ron Dye's head, and on the next play, Smithville quarterback Brad Yokon proved he could, as Burner feared, hit the short pass, connecting on a 10-yard TD for the only score of the game. In the rain, Bill Pennington completed only 2 of 15 passes. The Bombers lost 6-0. It was exactly the same score as their only other playoff game, a loss to Fremont St. Joseph 9 years earlier. As Bobby Stark said as he trudged off that waterlogged field, "I just couldn't shake and bake. I wish it'd been dry. Might have been a different story." Well, the rains couldn't wash away the disappointment of the loss, but the Bombers had done things no one had expected after the shock of the suspensions that had started the season. 7-2-1, third-place PCL finish, a playoff berth, 4 players on the all-PCL team: Bobby Starks, guard Ron Dye, and defensive players Bill Pennington and Dave Lutz. And every one of them was a senior. Burner was going to have one heck of a rebuilding job in 1985. But we can't leave that 1984 team without a postscript about how Bobby Stark's life has intertwined with mine. After being named first team All-Ohio by the Associated Press, Bobby went off to Hiram College, my alma mater, and he was pretty good there too. Well, maybe better than good. He still holds the Hiram College single-season scoring record with 97 points in 1987. He's the Terrier career scoring leader with 224 points. In 4 years, he carried the ball 777 times. He once returned a kickoff 100 yards. He was a selection to the Division III All-American team. He joined fellow Windham alumnus Dave Blankenship in the Hiram College Hall of Fame. That Bobby Starks, boy, he could play some ball. And he remains the most humble human being that I have ever met. When he graduated from Hiram, he applied for a teaching job at Maple Heights, where I was teaching and coaching. He came to my house, and he sat for hours with Lena and me, nervously prepping for his interview. Well, he named it. I got to teach with Bobby for several years before he moved on to Shaker Heights, where he teaches physical education. He's also one of the most respected athletic officials in Ohio for being chosen for the state finals in both basketball and football. Every once in a while, if you're lucky, you'll see him in zebra stripes at a Windham Bombers game. And 3 decades later, he doesn't look a whole lot older than when he was wearing black and gold and destroying Windham's opponents. And if you don't believe me, I would like to introduce you to my friend, Bobby Starks. Windham was shrinking. According to Superintendent Linda Huntley, the enrollment had dropped from 1,700 in 1973 to 1,340 in 1985. Today, there's 585 students in the Windham school system. Big news in town was an anti-pornography group made up of ministers from Garrettsville who were boycotting the Wyndham Lawson store because it carried Playboy magazine. On September 11th, Mayor Maurice Hankins, who had a tempestuous reign over the village, abolished the Board of Public Affairs, the biggest controversy in the town since the firing of Bob Worth. That news was soon Route 82 to call their neighbor, but it came at a price. An additional 55 cents was tacked onto the monthly $13 phone bill. Compare that to your cell phone bill nowadays. And Coach Jim Berner had to replace Bobby Starks, who that fall set a Hiram College single game rushing record with 197 yards in only his second game as a college player. Well, Berner didn't sound worried. As he told the Record Courier, we don't have one single player who can replace Bobby, but we do have several kids who can combine to do the job. Now, the best part of the Bomber picture was the line, with returning lettermen at every good spot. Dan Nutter and Bill Peachy would man the ends, while the interior line of Dave Wheeler, Guy Friend, Bill Hickman, and Chuck and Marty Utt were rock solid. Although line coach Don Robinson would lose two centers, Bill Hickman and Marty Utt, before the end of the season. Chuck Utt would emerge as the hero of the line as he covered wherever he was needed. Tim Gear and Chris Mickens would have to carry the running load, and Darren Fincham would be out on the wing. Foreign exchange student Miguel Brito, who would later in life become the Director of Economic Development for a huge city in Brazil, would replace Starks at place kicker. Oh, and Joey Fabry was back. Windham had a quarterback. Berner placed a lot of faith in his defense, but almost all of his starters would have to go both ways. The Bombers had beaten Newton Falls the year before, but 81 degrees at game time this year was strength sapping. And this year's contest was a festival of turnovers and penalties. Joey Fabry intercepted a pass. 2 plays later, he tossed one of his own. Tim Gear ran 66 yards for a touchdown, only to have it called back for holding. 3 fumbles led to 3 Tiger touchdowns and a 22-13 loss. Coach Berner said, the heat got the kids. That's not why we lost. Newton Falls is good, and you can't have 5 turnovers against a good team and expect to win. Well, another very good team, the 1984 co-champion Streetsboro Rockets, was coming from 15 miles up Route 303 to test them. And Joey Fabry was out with a shoulder injury, something that would plague him all season. The first half ended in a scoreless defensive struggle. Darrell Fall took Fabry's quarterback slot, but his inexperience, Bomber penalties, and a grinding Streetsboro running game added up to a 22-0 defeat. Suddenly, a very bad feeling crept over the Bomber faithful. They'd seen this show before. The last team they wanted to see now was the undefeated McDonald Blue Devils, ranked 7th in Ohio. So who would believe that they would not only win the game, but do something no other team in Portage County had ever done before? They won an overtime game. Nowadays, it's no big deal. Most teams play at least one a season. But this was the first year for the new overtime rule in Ohio. And Windham was the first PCL team to play in an overtime game. Tim Gear scored an opening touchdown that McDonald matched it. Darrell Fall hit Dan Nutter with a 19-yard strike. McDonald matched it. But the Fall to Nutter combination clicked one more time, and it was Windham that won the very first overtime game in Portage County history, 20-13. So, had the Bombers gotten things straightened out? Nope. A road trip to Southeast ended with a 17-0 spanking. After the game, Berner didn't beat around the bush. They pretty much shoved it down our throats. He said, truer words were never spoken. Rootstown came to Windham with PCL title hopes and didn't do a thing to damage them, leaving with a 14-7 win. The Bombers' only score came on a fake punt. The Rovers totaled 3 times the number of yards the Bombers gained. The next week against Mogadore, the revolving door of Darrell Fall and Joey Fabry at quarterback landed on Fabry. Fabry once again. Dan Nutter caught another touchdown pass. Tim Gear added one himself, but the Wildcats had too many tools on both sides of the line to be contained, and the Bombers' misery continued 27-17. No one could have been blamed for just looking forward to another wild Marty Hill-led basketball season. The Bombers stunk. They could easily end up 1-9. 1985 was going to be a very humbling experience, except these were the Windham Bombers. And there were 4 games left. Maybe something could be salvaged from the wreckage. After all, winless Crestwood was worse than they were. Oh, the Bombers tried hard to give it away. They fumbled 6 times. Now think about that for just a second. 6 fumbles. Only the incompetence of the Red Devils prevented another humiliation. But Dan Nutter continued his steady play at end, hauling in a 32-yard Fabry heave. Darren Fincham added a 15-yard jaunt. And just for good measure, Fincham caught a Fabry toss while falling out of the end zone. The scoreboard at the end of the game read 19-13 Windham. And as Burner sighed, win is a win. I'll take it. Now, in all the years that I've been researching Windham football, and I've now read over 100 years worth of articles on microfilm, the only time a reporter had ever used the word inept to describe the Bombers was to describe the 1953 Portage County preview game when Leo Cott fielded a lineup he had no intention of using during the regular season, so no one would know what kind of players he had. That was the year Windham won the league championship, by the way. But on October 19th, 1985, Record Courier reporter Herb Hall called the Windham Bombers inept. Thank God the Waterloo Vikings were just as inept. Both teams combined for 16 rushing yards in the first 2 quarters. Burner's halftime talk might have singed the air in the Bombers' locker room. Fabry's end of the 3rd quarter pass to Darren Fincham volleyballed off 2 Viking defensive backs before Fincham pulled it in and ran 50 yards. Jeff Smith's ensuing reception finally put the Bombers in the end zone. The tireless Tim Gear added a 9-yard plunge, and Windham escaped with a 14-0 win. Bomber tossed off another deep philosophic gem after that game. Ball sure bounces funny sometimes, doesn't it? Well, the next week against Woodridge, the ball kept bouncing in the Bombers' direction. Joey Fabry returned a Bulldog fumble 79 yards. Phil Starks returned an interception. Dan Nutter kept his reception streak going. And the defense logged its 2nd straight shutout 28-0. Which meant that the traditional season-ending battle against Garrettsville actually meant something. The Bombers could end this frustrating Jekyll and Hyde season with a 500 record. And the G-men were playing for exactly the same thing. The lead paragraph in the Record Courier article read, "The Windham offense was running in high gear last night." And they were right. Tim Gear, who had been the most reliable runner all season, exploded for 3 touchdowns and 162 rushing yards as the Bombers capped a remarkable mid-season turnaround with a 43-14 slaughter on the Garrettsville field. In fact, they had all 43 points by the end of the 3rd quarter. Junior Dan Boyd, Gear's toughest steel backfield collie, matched Gear score for score. And Burner, as if he was gazing into a crystal ball, said, "This is a nice way for the seniors to go out. 4 straight wins gives our underclassmen momentum for next year." Momentum. It would have to be put on hold for 9 months, but it's a nice thing to have. Senior defensive stars Dave Wheeler and Darren Fincham made the All-PCL team. Bill Hickman, Joe Fabry, and Dan Nutter made the 2nd team. The defensive 2nd team. No, not a single Bomber was recognized for his offensive prowess. That would not happen again. August of 1986 opened auspiciously. Wyndham Alloy Medals Class D softball team, led by Marcy McHenry on the mound and the hitting of Heather Kilgore, who was also a cheerleader on the football team, finished second in the state fast-pitch softball tournament, for which Barry Cree's Class B team had also qualified. But one unexpected event overshadowed that. Bob Work was back. All three Board of Education members who had forced his resignation 3 years earlier were gone, either retired or defeated for re-election. Linda Griswold Huntley had left her alma mater to be superintendent of Midview local schools, and the deck was cleared for Work, who had been working for the Trumbull County Board of Education to get enough years to retire with a full pension, returned to the school system he had served for 21 years and had never really abandoned. And even as Wyndham's welcomed one beloved figure back, they had to say a tearful goodbye to another. Leo Cott, the greatest football coach in Portage County history, passed away from anemia only 3 years after retiring from teaching. Wyndham's opening game that year would be played in front of bleachers that Leo Cott had built with his own hands. Oh, and one other thing. Jim Berner wasn't the head coach anymore. He'd been coaching at Wyndham since 1965, and his family recalls that he had decided that 20 years was enough. But being a Bomber since the day he was born, Berner couldn't just walk away. He became the athletic director instead, with the blessing of Francis Davis. Glenn Pesacek, who had been Marty Hill's teammate at Garrettsville and who had begun his coaching career at Crestwood, was now in charge, working with the coaching crew of Wayne Rankin, Bill Klosguy, Tom Hassler, and Don Robinson. And Pesacek, with Darrell Fall at quarterback, planned a different offensive scheme than Berner's Bryant Mount style. Pesacek's Bombers were the most experienced team in the PCL. He had 18 seniors with playoff experience and the momentum of the winning streak to end the 1985 season. They also knew the sour feeling that comes with losing streaks, too. The problem with the senior-heavy team is that the younger players didn't have a lot of experience. Depth would be the problem. But if there was ever to be a year in which the stars would align for Wyndham, it had to be this year. It was the job of co-captains Darrell Fall, Chuck Utt, and Guy Friend to make sure it did. Joey Faber's bum shoulder the previous season meant Darrell Fall had tons of time under center. Tim Gear, Dan Boyd, the duo with 6 touchdowns against Garfield in 1985 would be lugging the pigskin, and John McGahee would be on the wing. 4 of the greatest hands in Wyndham football history, belonging to Dan Nutter and Jeff Smith, would be out on the ends. The Utt boys, Marty and Chuck, Guy Friend, Bill Peachy, Greg Dye, Terry Van Steenberg, every one of them seniors, formed the most experienced line the Bombers had ever fielded. They weren't big, not like our modern Bombers, but they were quick. By the end of the season spent behind the rear ends of those boys, Darrell Fall would be sacked only 4 times in 12 games. The big question was, would they have endurance? Because every one of them would be going both ways, so conditioning was the name of the game in the preseason. And there was one more unexpected factor for that season. Although the playoffs were just a dream, a long way off, a bump in enrollment had kicked Wyndham up 1 division for 1986. It would take more computer points to qualify, and the competition would be a hell of a lot harder if they got in. The season opener against Newton Falls was always a good barometer of what the season might be like, and it looked like there might be fair weather ahead for the Bombers. Darrell Fall was 15 for 23 in the air, with one of the few underclass starters, Jeff Smith, nabbing 3 of them for TDs. Brian Miller scooted 26 yards for another, and Dan Nutter continued his amazing pass-catching streak by adding another touchdown in an unexpected 32-3 rout of the Tigers. Now, if the Bombers were going to have a tasty offense this year, the defense looked like it might be pretty appetizing too. It had to be. Streetsboro was their first league foe, and the Rockets featured Jack Glaziola, who ran low to the ground like Don Nottingham, a human bowling ball who had gone from the Windham Pee Wee football program to a legendary NFL career. Pesicek moaned, "Jack Glaziola is a carbon copy of his brother Joe, and I hope to God he's the last of them." If Streetsboro had seen the Newton Falls game film, the Bomber coaching staff had a surprise for him. Darrell Fall suffered a concussion early in the game, and for the rest of the game he had to be reminded what play he just called. Not really knowing where he was at any given moment, he imitated a modern Cleveland Browns quarterback, giving up 3 interceptions. But anytime the ball wasn't in the air, it was in Tim Gear's arms, and he chewed up the Rockets' defense for 166 yards. And more than anyone else, this was Dan Nutter's night to go berserk. Nutter slammed a Streetsboro runner into the end zone for a safety, 2-0. After the free kick, he hit a 23-yard field goal, 5-0. On the next drive, he caught an 8-yard pass for a TD, and then he kicked the extra point. He shut down the Rockets' last drive with an interception. The final score, Dan Nutter 12, Streetsboro 0. Now, the euphoria of those first 2 wins disappeared with the arrival of the McDonald Blue Devils, state-ranked once more. After a touchdown reception by Tim Click, the game was as nail-biting as the fans expected, with the only difference, with 4 minutes to go, being a missed field goal by the Bombers. But a trick play, a halfback pass to a quarterback flying down the field, gave McDonald a 13-6 victory. If there was any consolation for the dejected Bombers, it was a non-conference game, but they'd better regroup in a hurry. Now, Pesicek expected a defensive struggle in the next game against Southeast, and it was the Bombers' defense that showed up, holding the Pirates to a single first down in the first half. Darrell Fall hit Jeff Smith with a scoring strike, and Tim Peer and John Frame added short runs for a final score of 19-0. Just as importantly, Guy Friend had 7 solo tackles. Like the Record Courier headline said, "The Bombers are for real this year." Holding the Ridgetown Rovers to just 34 yards in 27 rushing attempts left no doubt. Fall, Gear, Boyd, and Jeff Smith were dazzling when the Bombers had the ball. Smith hauled in 2 touchdown passes, and Chris Mickens added scores on both a pass and a run. But it was the unheralded defense that was building Windham's reputation. A week of excited preparation for Mogadore was dampened at midweek. J. Preston Bloom, a Portage County education fixture since the 1930s, passed away at the age of 88. And Windham's league-leading 3-0 record was suddenly 2-1 at Wednesday's practice. The Ohio High School Athletic Association had ruled that a player who had transferred from Newton Falls, whom Pesicek had inserted for a few garbage time plays against Southeast, had been ineligible. So now, Mogadore had grabbed the league lead. The Wildcats were ranked 3rd in Ohio, and they were coming to town 2 inches of rain turned Ed Little Field into a quagmire. A picture of Chris Mickens in action that ran in the newspaper needed a caption since the reader couldn't tell the Mogador uniforms from Windham's. Mickens was filling in for the injured Tim Gear, and it was his night to shine, gaining 99 yards on a night in which passing was impossible, except, that is, for one Darrell Fall pass, which Dan Nutter tipped to John McGahee at the back of the end zone. Mogador coach Norm Lingle slid onto the field screaming that McGahee was out of bounds. Instant replay didn't exist in those days, Coach. Bombers won 7-0. Norm Lingle blamed the officials. It's never Mogador's fault. But the Wildcats, because of that Southeast forfeit, remained in the PCL title picture. It would be a battle for the rest of the season. A trip to Manaway yielded a 30-15 win over Crestwood as the Fall to Smith connection added 2 more touchdowns, and Dan Nutter added 1. Guy Friend flattened Red Devil quarterback Josh Cavalier in the end zone to add a safety to Windham's defensive resume. They had now given up only 40 points in 7 games and had logged 3 shutouts. And that win over Mogador had given them enough computer points to vault them into 2nd place in the Division IV regional rankings. So maybe they shouldn't have taken Waterloo in the middle of a shockingly mediocre season so lightly. Or maybe it was because a water main break had sent students home early that morning, and a few of them might have had a few extracurricular activities. Yeah, you're laughing, aren't you, Dan? Only an extra point by Dan Mickens after a deja vu tip by Jeff Smith and John McGahee in the end zone saved the 13-12 win by the Bombers. Now, 2 games stood between Windham and at least a share of its first league championship in the 1980s. The Bombers had won PCL titles in every decade since returning to 11-man. The 1953, 1966, and 1974 trophies were getting very lonely in that showcase. Woodridge came in firing, throwing 40 passes. But Pesachek had his boys ready. Tom Beich, John McGahee, and Tim Graham led the interception parade to stall every Bulldog drive. Jeff Smith nabbed 3 touchdown passes. Dan Nutter added another to his phenomenal resume, and the Bombers came home from Peninsula with a 34-0 win, their 4th shutout of the season. Now, Garrettsville was the sole obstacle between Windham and their PCL championship. And Garfield was enduring a stinker of a season, winning only 2 games. The G-men lasted all of 17 seconds. With the Bombers in what today would be called a no-huddle offense, Jeff Smith reached down, hiked the ball to Darrell Fall, and Fall threw a bomb to John McGahee before the Garfield defenders knew what was happening. Glenn Pesachek, it turned out, had a deep bag of razzle-dazzle to work with. Fall set a Windham record that night, passing for 318 yards. Tim Gear scored a touchdown, and for the 3rd game in half a season, Jeff Smith tipped the pass to John McGahee in the end zone, in addition to pulling in 2 touchdowns of his own. The final score, 34-7, burned long into the night on that new scoreboard over on School Street. The Bombers, the Windham Bombers, were Portage County League champions. Oh, they had to share it with Mogador, but in the heart of Bomber fans, they knew Windham had won the title on that muddy field back in October when they had beaten the Wild Wildcats. Only the Southeast forfeit had added the letters CO in front of champion. So now it was time for the second season. Windham had never won a playoff game ever. In 2018, the top 32 teams in every region make the playoffs. In 1986, the top 16 got in. And because of that Southeast forfeit, the number 16 team was the Windham Bombers. Their opponent would be parochial monster St. Thomas Aquinas from Louisville, who had played in the state championship game in both of the preceding 2 years. Rookie coach Glenn Pesicek knew that his team would need to play the game of their lives. Pesicek had been inviting a different group of players to his home for weeknight dinners, and he felt like he had welded together a solid contender. As Pesicek told the Record Courier reporter, defense is what wins games at this time of the season. We can't give up a cheap touchdown. We have to make them drive the ball down the field and hope they make the big mistake. We just have to make sure that we don't beat ourselves either. They didn't. In the ultimate David versus Goliath showdown, Darrell Falk etched his name in the record book, completing 24 of 37 passes, 11 of them falling into the unbelievably soft hands of sophomore Jeff Smith. But it took that rarest of Windham accomplishments, a 30-yard field goal by Chris Mickens with 28 seconds left, to seal the most improbable win in Bomber history, 16-14. Darrell Fall had played with blood gushing from his mouth after having a tooth knocked out. Dan Nutter, who probably had a concussion on his first kickoff reception, suffered a broken collarbone on the next kickoff reception. But an inspired Mike Downey took his place, catching an 18-yard dart from Fall to set up the winning field goal. So the Bombers were going where they had never gone before, the second round of the playoffs. But there was one hellacious roadblock. They were going to have to play against OJ in the next game. No, it wasn't the OJ who was allegedly a multiple murderer in the future. But it was an OJ who gained over 7,000 yards in his high school career. It was an OJ who would catch 90 passes from Dan Marino in 1998 to lead the NFL. His last name was McDuffie. He played for undefeated Gates Mills Hawken, the top-ranked team in the state of Ohio, and unheralded, tiny Windham High School would try to have to stop him. The team knew what they were facing, and that Friday they did something they'd never done before. Instead of football jerseys, every senior wore suits to school that day. Suits and game faces that told of grit and determination. It was 8 degrees and snowing at game time, with a wind chill measured at 19 degrees below zero. The field at Brooklyn High School was grassless and frozen and cut like glass on bare skin. The Arctic condition contributed to an astounding 9 turnovers in the game. The Bombers stopped O.J. McDuffie. He never scored. Chuck and Marty Utt played the games of their lives, stopping the Hawks on the Windham 1-yard line after a 71-yard drive. The score was Hawken 8, Windham 6. With the Bombers on the Hawken 25, 25 in the fourth quarter. Darrell Fall threw a perfect spiral to Jeff Smith in the end zone. But just as the sophomore's hands closed on that slick, frozen ball, well, as Jeff said after the game, I had the ball on my fingertips, but a guy pulled my arm off at the last second. Darrell had the ball right there, if I could just have held it, but he couldn't. The longest season in Bomber history ended with the ball skittering off into the Cuyahoga County night. 2 points is all that stood between Windham and a shot at a state championship. But as Coach Pesicek said in his final quote, the kids had a great year, and that is what we'll remember. 5 Bombers: Jeff Smith, Darrell Fall, Guy Friend, Dan Nutter, Chuck Up, made first team All-PCL. Bill Peachy, Dan Boyd, and Chris Mickens made second team. Darrell Fall was the quarterback on the third team All-State team. And Glenn Pesicek was, deservedly, the PCL Coach of the Year. Pesicek coached another 2 years at Windham, but eventually he succumbed to the lure of sunshine. Even though the Bombers had lost to McDonald in 1986, their coach was impressed with Pesicek's coaching talent. And when he went to Florida, he offered Pesicek the chance to coach a warm weather team. Well, that's where Glenn Pesicek remains today, still teaching biology at J.D. Terravella High School in Coral Springs, Florida. But he's never forgotten those blue-collar kids who took his Bombers further than they had ever been before. So, which Bomber team was the greatest 11-man champion of all time? The 1953 team that only had 17 players on it? The 1966 team, which I was on? The 1974 team with Dave Flamelin quarterback and Barry Lyons running the ball? Or that 1986 team? Or maybe it was one of the 3 teams that won the championship of the Tiny Tomahawk Conference in the late 1950s, when the PCL was afraid to play the Windham Bombers. Now here's what I say. If a team wins a league championship, they are immortal. They belong in the ranks of the legends. Every single player on those teams is important and gets to treasure his memories forever. And it sure would be nice to have another squad join that group as Windham begins its 2nd century of football in 2018.